All right, welcome again to Civic Tech Hack Night number 514. Today, we are so excited to have Wingham Rowan with us. Wingham is a former television anchor, host of the UK's longest running series about life online. He is also an initiator and leader of projects that launched radical new labor markets backed by public agencies in the US and the UK. Since the 2010s, traditional markets for labor, finance, goods, services, and content have been displaced by multinational platforms. His work focuses on how any government could induce corporates to fund and run a regulated system of markets across their economy, available neutrally to anyone wanting to use it, and that would be a new public utility. Wingham, take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Erin. So I'm just going to share my screen. So yes, as Erin said, this is about the new plumbing of capitalism, and it's specifically about a 30-year project that's moved through public agencies and think tanks in the US and the UK. But it's one that we think might be very timely for Canada for a variety of reasons that I'll get to at the moment. And I'd be really interested in your feedback and your thinking on that after this. There is a mass of detail behind this, which I'm just going to rattle through very quickly and glibly, so I don't become a wall of sound. But if you're up for some multitasking, do please call up peoplescapitalism.org and read along. So for context, in the last 15 years or so, traditional markets, as Erin said, for labor, for finance, for goods, for services, have been sidelined by online platforms. And the way Uber has supplanted taxi firms around the world and other gig work apps run by multinational companies that have done the same in other sectors is just a visible tip of this iceberg. There are far more potent platforms out of sight. So if you are a blue collar corporate employee now in retail, hospitality, distribution, all sorts of sectors, you will typically be called in and sent home day by day or hour by hour by a workforce scheduling system like WC8. And these platforms run monopsony labor markets for large corporates. It's brilliant at cutting labor costs and getting without kind of impacting your levels of service. You get the right balance of people exactly in line with your needs. And what this infrastructure is doing across the economic base in country after country is terrible. It's people are being plunged into precarity. These apps deny people meaningful data. They lock people into narrow silos of activity. You can't trade across more than 3 or 4 of these markets simultaneously, because if you're off doing a booking for one of them, when another needs you, the second one will downgrade you for not being available. They typically run oversupplied markets. That's why we get an Uber ride so fast. And for this service, they retain 25 to 30% of your income. It sucks. And it's a total waste of economic potential. All over Toronto today, there will be people cycling around with a box on their back who have all sorts of potential in your economy. But all that the infrastructure that's available to them needs them to do is deliver pizzas as quickly and cheaply as possible. And there's a lot of organizations trying to make Silicon Valley play nice and get these markets to be fair to the workers, to give them data, to force what are called fair work weeks and so on. Long story short, those efforts to mitigate what Silicon Valley are doing aren't really working as hoped. It's a kind of golden rule these days that whoever runs the digital infrastructure sets the rules. These markets are so opaque and so sophisticated that they can subvert all sorts of well-intentioned regulatory initiatives. The tragedy of this for your economy becomes clear when you look at how another part of the economy has used platform technologies. Wall Street has developed extraordinary new markets of unparalleled depth, breadth, low transaction charges, actionable data hosing out, low transaction risks, solid governance. It's extraordinary how Wall Street has been able, and by Wall Street, I mean the sort of global financial institutions, have been able to create this world of integrated, very solid, deep, interconnected marketplaces. And the contrast with the sort of mishmash of coming and going startups trying to drive down to the cheapest labor costs and the fastest response times at the bottom of the economy is breathtaking. And our project focuses not on how you regulate what Silicon Valley has chosen to throw at us. We focus on what could platform technologies do if governments initiated a different version of them. And this might sound a bit odd, but we're actually surrounded by technologies that were shaped by government initiation over 200 years. And my favorite example is industrial pumping. So pumping took huge advances technologically in the 1810s and 1820s, and a bunch of opportunist startups sprung up in urban areas, pumping river water to affluent households. It was dirty, and they could only pump at high tide, but it was more convenient than sending a servant to the riverbank with a bucket. So they prospered. And a bunch of people started asking, well, why can't we have water supply to every home, and why can't it be clean water? And why can't it be 24/7 supply? And you can only do that if government gets involved, because you need coordinated reservoirs, and startups cannot forcibly purchase entire valleys and flood them. Startups can't jail people who use designated watercourses as their sewer. Startups can't rip up main roads to install trunk piping. The British government was the first to go down the path of a public supply, 1848 Public Health Act. Every country in the world copied the model. And it's a similar story, not always with Britain in the lead, I hasten to add, for electricity, air traffic control, money supply, roads, rail, broadcasting, and some other key technologies. They all were shaped by acts of parliament. And that new public utility version of the technology became so much more popular. And a few takeaways from this legislation, which is easily overlooked by economic historians. The first is just how radically different the public utility versions were. When you moved from landlords and landowners just setting up roads randomly and charging users to government coordinating planning of roads and using its forcible land purchasing rights and enforcing legal driving rules, it was just a game changer. These legislative acts created all sorts of innovation. So public water supply spawned commercial laundries, fire protection, cordials that require dilution, personal toiletries, all industries that barely existed in the days of sporadic dirty water. So we don't have to use these public utilities. If you don't like the one-size-fits-all voltage coming out of your nation's electricity grid, buy a home generator. But most of us really like these public utilities. We just take them for granted and rely on them. And we accept the trade-offs they involve. So our work focuses on this view of online platform technologies, not for social media, not for streaming, but for economic interactions, buying and selling. And our starting point wasn't, hey, what's the great business opportunity? But what do you really want these incredibly powerful technologies to do for society, for economic inclusion, for resilience, for greening the economy, for all sorts of objectives that are so important these days? And it's been mapped out in great detail. And I'm going to skim through it very, very quickly. But broadly, a few of the changes, why it's so different. You want seamless horizontal markets. So if I live in Toronto and I like animals, I can go on WAG and offer myself as a dog walker. And WAG is multinational. So I could do dog walking in Vancouver. I could do dog walking in Amsterdam, in Tokyo, in London. But it's unlikely I'm going to do that. It's much more likely I've got monetizable skills apart from dog walking. I might be good with children. I've learnt cooking. I did gardening at school. I've been a carpenter for a while. I might have economic assets outside my ability to work. I might want to rent my bike I'm not using tomorrow morning. I might want to rent the storage space under my stairs. I might have $100 I don't need until this time next week, and I want to lend that out for a return. You want all this to be utterly seamless in one set of interconnected markets. You want it generating a fire hose of data that anyone can access, anonymized data on patterns of demand, supply, pricing, and so on. You want to foster that data creating investment opportunities. Hey, there's a shortage of carpet layers in Eastern Toronto and an oversupply of van drivers in Western Toronto right now. I'm going to fund provenly reliable van drivers who are interested in learning carpet laying in return for a 15% cut of their enhanced earnings for the following 6 months. There's all sorts of possibilities here. I won't go into them because we all know how irritating a prolonged exposure to a British accent can be. But and suffice to say, these markets have to be regulated. This isn't just about, an unfettered business opportunity. So we call this envisaged system of markets in any jurisdiction POEMs, public official e-markets. And the key to realizing POEMs is you don't want the taxpayer paying for it. You don't want government running it for all sorts of reasons. And it's got to widen everyone's choices. You're not going to impose any restrictions on other marketplaces. What you need is a competitive concession, which is enacted through legislation. So governments, any government, has all sorts of leverage that it could use to really make any system of e-markets fantastically more useful. And just to give one headline example, pump priming. Government is the biggest buyer of flexible labor, directly or indirectly, in any economy. If it channeled that expenditure through a new system of e-markets for the nation, it would get it to critical mass in so many sectors almost overnight at no cost. There's all sorts of other things they could do. If you give these benefits uniquely to a consortium that wants to run and build POEMs for your jurisdiction, you will be creating a phenomenal business opportunity. So you impose public service obligations alongside the benefits to whichever consortium wins. And you might say, right, we're going to give the benefits on the left to a winning consortium of corporate funders and providers for, let's say, 15 years, so long as they continue to comply with the obligations on the right. And the winner of our concession will be whichever consortium commits to doing this for our nation at the lowest percentage markup on each transaction. And we model it at less than 2% would be significantly attractive across Canada. And if this again sounds a bit odd, it's not. This kind of competitive concession is exactly how governments get corporates competing to fund and run national and state lotteries. So that's the concession model, and it's not that radical. But it hasn't been the political mood. So just to share a bit of our story, I go back 30 years with this project. It all started at the think tank Demos in London in 1995. I was then anchoring a TV series about life on the internet, which was rather embarrassingly racy for these kind of policy-focused events. Anything you want to know about foot fetishists online in the 1990s, I can tell you. And out of that work at Demos came books and policy papers for units on the free market right, the anti-poverty left. We're completely apolitical, non-profit. And then the British government came in and funded a very limited part of this vision, which is better markets for gig work. So government, all developed nations have what are called public employment services, job centres, all sectors, job boards, and so on. And we're about extending that to the era of gig work. So the government provides a platform for anybody who wants to buy gig work and anyone wants to sell gig work. And please don't think about gig work in terms of delivering pizzas. That's so low quality, we don't even look at it. There's very high quality gig work available in any economy. And that spread to the US. And that's why I am now in California. So that's what we've done. And throughout this work on what we call the small vision, better markets for gig work, we've been very disciplined and learned to keep quiet about the big vision, about, well, why not just have markets for all sorts of economic activity across where local businesses or regular people can earn, not just gig work. There's so much more to the microeconomy. And the mood just hasn't been right. It's been too radical. And frankly, there's been this terrible political passivity. There's been this kind of awe for, quote, innovators, the American companies that have largely come in and colonized swaths of the economy in country after country. And this technology was publicly funded. And frankly, if for those of us who were thinking about this stuff in 1995, something like Airbnb is entirely predictable. Someone was always going to put together payments technology, display technology, mapping technology, security in a way that allowed people to rent out spare rooms. It was just blindingly obvious in 1995. And to hear people in 2010 saying, oh, wow, we've got to somehow comply with Airbnb to get tourism opportunities for our city is just so disheartening. And the problems caused by this gulf, this chasm between these amazingly powerful markets for institutions at the top of the economy and these terrible pseudo markets for people at the bottom of the economy has just grown wider and wider. And you can see it. I like to show two graphs side by side. This is the story of financialization over the platforms era, just more and more resource being sucked out of mainstream economies into financial speculation. These markets are so efficient, so transaction risk mitigating, and so on. And the job quality index, it is US data. I don't think there's comparable information gathered in one place for Canada. But what you're seeing is, although there have been an increase in jobs in the platform era, it's overwhelmingly an increase in these very low quality, precarious jobs where people don't know their hours week to week, even day to day. And if you're thinking this seems a bit remote, that's possibly because you're relatively highly skilled and lucky enough to have regular employment. If you're blue collar, your chances of a regular job with predictable hours and progression and so on, protections and so on these days is diminishing so fast. And you can see the consequences of this. There was polling earlier this year that found around the world 56% of adults believe their economy is rigged against them. And even more alarmingly, 40% of adults believe violence is now justified to overturn the economic system. This is what capitalism in the digital era is doing to people. And we believe, I mean, there are other reasons, there are other factors, of course, outsourcing, bank bailouts, and so on. But these new arteries of market economies, these new platforms, are a sustaining architecture for these factors: the globalization, the outsourcing, the waning of unions, every day. And so our interest is there now a country that might be ready to take the big step of saying, yeah, actually, we don't want Silicon Valley coming in and just colonizing a huge chunk of our economic activity. We think our citizens and our local businesses should have the choice of sovereign markets run for the benefit of our economy, transparent, regulated. We're not going to pay for it. We're not going to clamp down on any of the alternatives. It's a matter of choice for each person. But we think our citizens and our businesses deserve that. And we are encouraged as government by the staggering success of other digital public infrastructure projects like the PIX payment stack in Brazil, Aadhaar identity system in India, and the central bank digital currencies around the world. So we are going to instigate a version of e-markets under regional control. And we think this might be applicable to Canada. We thought this for a long time, partly because you have a very good balance between the federal and the government and the provinces, which creates a lovely sweet spot where a small number of people could move a lot of public spending into a new channel to go to the existing workers and into their communities, but with a magnifier effect because it gets a new market to critical mass. So that's one key reason we've always been interested in Canada, and we have done some work with the Ontario Labour Ministry. The second reason, and I'm trying to phrase this delicately, is just to say politics of kind of stepping back from American infrastructure might be timely right now. Not my place to comment, but I sense, if your companies are struggling to export their whiskey south of the border, do you really want American companies getting rich off all these people doing demeaning tasks around Toronto today? I just asked that question. There is Jamie has just told me there can be a breakout room later on for anyone who wants to kick the tires on this, have a look. But if you have any insights on whether Canada might have the convening interests, the resources, the coverage, the sort of motivated, resourceful people to get this going, our mission is to evolve into a kind of Linux foundation of this new kind of marketplace. We are not trying to control it or own it. That's us.